Hello, we are delighted to welcome a fantastic range of speakers this afternoon to answer your questions around resilient management based off of our video event, which was posted last month. And so before beginning, we are going to have a brief introduction from each of our speakers. So Tony, if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Tony Vickers-Byrne, recently retired as Chief Advisor for HR Practice at the CIPD. Prior to that, I was HR Director in the Civil Service and in the NHS.
Julie?
Hi everyone, I'm Julie Dennis and I'm the Head of Diversity and Inclusion at ACAS.
Emma?
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Mamo. I'm Head of Workplace Wellbeing at Mind, the mental health charity.
Asif?
Hi, I'm Asif Sadiq. I'm the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion for Adidas.
Super. And David?
Hi Grace, hi everyone. David Pearson. I'm an inclusion expert. I'm currently undertaking some really interesting research into inclusion and belonging, and my most immediate role has been as Director of Global Inclusion and Diversity at KPMG.
Super. Wonderful stuff. So we will begin then and go around in that same order. So Tony, the first question for you is around what leaders can do to make sure that their colleagues feel that they belong, are valued and are loved, even though they mightn't necessarily have experienced that themselves in the workplace. With the proviso that is that even possible for a leader to be able to show when they haven't themselves experienced it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is possible, but I think the key thing for any manager, any leader at all times, but particularly now, is to be authentic and to be one of us, and so that the teams who they're leading actually realise that this individual is going through the same things and the same vulnerabilities, the same concerns, the same worries that they are sharing as well, and there's a huge opportunity, I think, for the leaders supported by HR to really show that their people matter to them more than the profits. And there's been discussions going on at the moment about is the lockdown going to cause more deaths than through the infection itself? But people are not looking about profits; they're looking about sustainability in those terms. But quite clearly, the message coming through from the government, the right one, is that this is a public health emergency. And I think if managers can actually follow that line, that they're going to put their people first, they're going to do the risk assessments, they're going to understand people's concerns on an individual basis, and they're going to share their own with them, there's a huge opportunity for management to improve and develop. And it's things that the CIPD have been talking about for a number of years now. Obviously, we wouldn't want these things to happen because of the circumstances that we all face, but the importance of the manager looking after the individual team member as their key priority, the importance of individuals having time off to do charitable work, the importance of managers speaking to individuals and understanding and listening to them, so that they really understand what they're going through, can empathise, and then take that intelligent, compassionate action is key. So the short answer is that they've got to listen, and they've got to act appropriately, and they've got to be authentic.
Super. Thank you, Tony. And then the next question is for Julie. So Julie provided some practical advice for managers at this moment. And the question for her is around what an awkward leader might be able to do in order to better adapt to the current circumstances. So if they're not used to striking up conversations when it's one-to-one in the office, how would they be able to approach the current situation? Should they be touching base, or should they just be honest about the fact that that it's something that they find really quite difficult? And so Julie, what advice would you offer in that instance?
So I think the first thing I'd say is honesty is the best approach. Again, picking up on what Tony said, really, being that inclusive leader, an inclusive leader is someone who's comfortable in saying that they actually are out of their comfort zone. This is new for some of us. Some of us aren't that interactive with our people at work. Some of us are very used to just talking about the workload and stuff like that. So I think it's about being honest and saying, you know, this is new for me as well. It's also about recognising that everybody is different, and that includes you as a leader in an organisation. So actually, by having those one-to-one conversations with your people and finding out how do they want to interact with you is really important. What I've been noticing over the last, 9 weeks, we've had a lot more video calling, like we're doing today, and not everybody's comfortable with that. And there could be different reasons why people aren't comfortable with video calling. We know now from research that, individuals who have neurodiverse conditions may not be as comfortable with video calling. But there are other things that I think we need to be mindful of, things around, we've got truly inclusive workplaces. So what about if you've got a trans individual in your organisation, especially a trans woman who, we've been in lockdown for coming up to 10 weeks. We've not had access to some of the facilities that we've normally been able to use. So for a trans woman, you may inadvertently be outing her by doing a video call because she may not be looking the best that she wants to look at the minute because she's not had access to normal things such as hairdressers and beauty stuff, exactly, etc. And I think that's also true with other people. I know for myself, I always keep laughing with my team about, you see how the weeks are going, you'll get to see what my real hair colour is. Now, I can laugh about that, but for some people, that's very, very sensitive for them. We pride ourselves in appearance. So I think we need to make sure that a good leader will have that conversation with their people and say, how is the best way that we can do this? And also to be able to talk about, I know we need to talk about how you're getting on at work, but let's have that one-to-one conversation about how are things at home. I'm seeing some excellent things in ACAS, for example. My manager, for example, he's got a young child. We think it's fantastic that she decides every time he's doing a meeting, she decides to turn up in the video. I think that shows him as a real person. And I think we're a lot more forgiving, aren't we, at the moment, when other things are happening, or if a dog suddenly appears in the background or stuff like that. So I think, again, that awkward leader should be able to embrace that and also say, we don't have to be perfect at the minute. Your well-being is most important, and I want to get the best out of you.
Super stuff. Thank you, Julie. And then the next question for Emma is around an employee who could be struggling about disclosing mental health or well-being issues to a leader when they don't have good trust. So for the leader themselves, if they notice that something is awry, how exactly ought they to deal with that situation?
In terms of that question, I mean, in an ideal world, there wouldn't be issues of trust. Every manager would hopefully have that kind of relationship with the people in their team, the individuals within their team, where they're having regular catch-ups, they're having well-being check-ins, there's conversations, they're asking for feedback on how they support the person. There's a conversation, there's a dialogue going where that person can raise concerns if they're struggling, but equally, if the manager is concerned, they feel comfortable to raise those conversations and open up the conversation. So my first point would be that I would hope that, managers would have those kind of relationships with their people. But if they don't, or if there's been some issues or tensions, okay, fair enough. In terms of then addressing something, if you are worried about someone, it's about broaching the conversation and linking to what Julie was saying about leaning into that. I think it's a judgment call about whether you want to say, I've noticed a change in you, or I'm concerned about you. Linking back to what Tony said, it might be about being vulnerable yourself, saying, it's challenging times at the moment. I'm struggling on a day-to-day basis. It's a roller coaster of emotions. How are you doing? And see if you can open up the conversation in that way. If they do then start sharing stuff, I would say before you try and open up this conversation, make sure all devices and platforms are turned off so you can really focus and you're not, disturbed during that conversation, distracted. And then try and ask open conversations, let the person tell you what's going on for them. When they've done that, then you can start exploring at that time, if appropriate, what you can put in place, or if the person wants to take a break after sharing that, you can come back to it. Again, be led by the person. If you try and broach it and they don't open up at that point, I think you can't pressurize someone, even if you're worried about someone. I think you can just say, I have an open door. If there is anything going on, no, I'm here for you. This is what's available within the organization. You know, once you say something, you can't unsay it. And so people might feel nervous. You might feel it's the right time to bring it up because you're worried, but they might not want to share at this point, or they might be accessing support elsewhere and don't want to talk about it with you at that point. So it's about giving reassurance, telling them what's available, and then letting it go for that moment, unless you are more concerned about someone. Then you might need to think about other actions to take, seeking advice from HR and those kind of things to be mindful of.
Really useful. Thank you, Emma. And then the next question is for you, Asif. So this question is around fostering belonging from afar, especially when it comes to companies trying to foster belonging once onboarding, and whether it's possible for employees to feel as though they belong, even when maybe they never have worked in an office with their colleagues. And so what kind of insight could you provide? Do you think it is possible? And if so, how could it be facilitated?
So I think it is possible to create a sense of belonging in the current environment for numerous reasons. Firstly, because we're all working in the same situation, so everyone's actually working from home, and there are things that we can do that we'd normally do, but in a virtual way, to create that sense of belonging. Although there is a second part to this, which is how do we continue that journey of creating a sense of belonging for people who are working virtually or who are still going to work from home when people start returning. Because the truth is, there's very few organizations that once the lockdown is lifted, will turn around and say, okay, 100% of our staff can turn up tomorrow. It's not going to happen. It's going to be in groups. And what you probably end up finding is the people who will probably end up going back last will have certain diversity elements, whether it be accessibility needs or numerous things that will result in them not going back with others. But to answer the key question about belonging in a virtual environment, of course we can. It's the things that we can do that create that sense of belonging for people in the real sort of face-to-face environment as well. So what does that look like? So how do we make sure that when we are onboarding people, that we're getting to know them? We're creating this sense of that you can bring your authentic self. And it's small things, right? So how do we take away some of the fears around background? So I still remember, so I've actually been through that process where I've onboarded virtually in my new organization, and it was a really pleasant experience, which allowed me to feel like I belonged, because there's no expectations. I could be me. I didn't have to sit in a fancy office anywhere, or create this background which made me look like I'm fitting into that environment. Even dressing wise, I'm used to wearing suits. For those of you who know me, know that I've worn suits for a very long time, and then I've gone into this environment where whatever you wear is fine, right? You could turn up in your workout gear, and that's fine as well, right? So it's all that sort of thing. And then actually to the points that were mentioned as well, actually by Julie, that I've got kids, and they might even run into this call at some point because they're that young and they think it's really enjoyable to join calls. But that was fine, right? So from day one, it was fine. I still remember the first meeting I joined, our sort of global team meeting. Someone was cooking away. Someone had their kid on their lap. Someone was out and about doing some exercise as well while they were talking on this call. And I was like, wow. So everyone's being themselves. No one's hiding who they are. And that's great, because I think the danger is when we create an environment or go by the rules and regulations that we must create in the virtual space. That's when you can't bring your authentic self, right? So if I had to dress up and act a certain way and things like that. The second element to it is, how do we create opportunities for the informal conversations, the conversations you'd have outside of meetings, outside of your sort of normal working environment. So what I'd call the conversations by the water machine, the conversations in the kitchen. So how do you create that in a virtual environment? And I think it's possible. It's taking out time within that virtual space. So we actually have a lunchtime hour where people get their lunch, and anyone can join that one lunchtime hour, and you can just have a conversation. There's no agenda. It's not a meeting. Anyone can join. And it's things like that. So that makes you, again, you can share, you know, conversations, you can share more about yourself, you talk about the food you're eating, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's possible, very, very possible. We just need to be human about it. You know, diversity and inclusion, one of the things I always talk about is, you know, it's not this fixed things that we must do. It's about getting to know people. And it's the basic conversations that we're not having. You know, any induction, any onboarding, people talk about, you know, our principles around diversity is this, our principles around inclusion is that. But what does that mean? How do you make your people feel it? And once we get to that stage, that's where people will feel like they belong. But most importantly for anyone, I think, is, I mean, it's all great right now, but let's make sure that people who are working virtually in 6 months' time, 9 months' time, a year's time, 2 years' time, still feel included and still can have that sense of belonging. Because it's very easy for us to go back to the office and then forget about them, or forget about that situation we were in and adapt to our new norm and not allow them to feel included and have a sense of belonging.
Super. Thank you, Asif. And then the final question is for you, David. First of all, before we launch into the question that's for you, thanks so much for providing questions to the other speakers, which were really incisive and provided such a variety of insights. So thank you for that. And your question is from Damien, who is interested in cultural intelligence and whether it's possible for leaders to display it and to have it, even if they themselves haven't actually experienced much cultural differences in their own experiences. So if they haven't particularly traveled, or maybe it's in contact with employees who are in different locations. And so what kind of insight can you provide there?
Great. Thanks, Grace. This is a great question from Damien. Thanks for asking it, and for highlighting that you've seen for yourself, you know, some of these challenges leaders face in putting training into practice. Just as a reminder, when I did my interview, I flagged that the culture we're talking about here isn't national culture, you know, like food or food habits or clothing. It's the day-to-day culture as shown by the way we all behave, and what I call the profound understanding that good leaders and managers have for supporting the welfare and sense of security of employees, you know, and everyone else. Julie, Emma, Tony, Asif have all kind of mentioned this importance of the role of supporting welfare and making people feel included and belonging. Now, of course, if this were an interactive session, the first thing I'd do, Damien, after thanking you for the question, is actually to ask the question back to you. So I'd say, you know, do you think it's possible for leaders to develop cultural intelligence even if they've never travelled or experienced cultural differences? And the reason I do that is because I'd love to explore what your own instincts tell you, you know, what insights and experience of your own tell you, and maybe build from that. Obviously, that's not possible in the format we're using here. So, and this analogy is to do with music and what it means to be tone deaf. So this is a phrase people use when they want to describe a situation where they believe that they, or maybe someone else, can't sing in tune, right? You call that being tone deaf, because it seems to describe and explain what's happening. You know, someone says, oh, I can't possibly sing, I'm tone deaf. And that's the explanation. I can't sing. Why? Because I'm tone deaf, meaning I can't listen to musical tones and then reproduce them using my voice. However, there's this wonderful, inspiring, passionate man called Benjamin Zander. You may have heard of him. He's done TED Talks. He's on YouTube. He challenges this thinking very directly. He says there's no such thing as being tone deaf. And the reason he says that is because if we were tone deaf, for example, we wouldn't be able to recognize our mother's voice when we speak to her on the phone. We wouldn't be able to recognize when someone talking to us is distressed or happy or angry from the tone of their voice. So he says everyone who can physically hear actually does have the instinctive ability to understand and distinguish between different tones. It's just that some people have had the opportunity for training to convert that innate ability and express it in certain ways, like being able to sing in tune. So to me, this analogy is something that helps me understand Damien's question. Cultural intelligence, you know, in some ways it's just a label, right? It's just like tone deaf is a label. When we talk about cultural intelligence, we might be referring to something really specific. like a kind of academic definition of that, or something someone's created that they use some sort of tool to measure cultural intelligence. We know tools like that exist. Some of you might be familiar with the IDI, the Intercultural Development Inventory, for example. But I think we can also just think of cultural intelligence as something instinctive, the instinctive ability to understand the nuances of how others behave and how they feel in a given context or setting, and how we interact with them in those settings, and how those settings have an impact on all of us and how we behave. And it's kind of a bit linked, I think, to emotional intelligence, which we might be familiar with this idea. But I think whereas emotional intelligence focuses on the individual and reading and responding to another person's emotions in that moment, for me, cultural intelligence looks for patterns in behavior within a context or a setting, and it's usually over time, not just in that second, but over time. So can a leader who hasn't traveled or experienced other cultures develop cultural intelligence? Well, based on the analogy of being tone deaf, absolutely. For me, it's about recognizing that all leaders have an innate sense of culture, because all of us know ourselves what it feels like to be in a different context or a different situation. And as people have mentioned already, you know, we've talked about this on the call so far, the different situation we're currently in at the moment with lockdown for many of us and having to interact on video calls. So for example, if you normally wear a suit or high heels in the workplace, now if I got you to dress, say, in board shorts or a bikini and to go to work dressed like that, you'd immediately know that it felt different, right? And just as at the moment, you know, we're all experiencing what it's like to be on video calls pretty much all of the time, rather than being in the office and perhaps only occasionally being on video calls. And that does feel different. So then the question is, can we develop that innate sense of these different contexts and how they feel different in our leaders in such a way that they can lead better? And I would say again, yes, we can. There's lots of ways to do this, but I'll just share 3 brief ideas that I think will lead to more success. The first thing I think is to help our leaders gain awareness that they've already got these innate skills. And I think this is like making people aware that they can in fact hear different tones. You know, they can recognize their mother, therefore they're definitely not tone deaf. And I think this gets rid of one of the barriers that some leaders may throw up. They might say, oh, I'm not very good at dealing with different cultures. The second thing, I think we can help leaders build from what they can already do. So this could be something like an inventory where you get a leader to reflect on the things they're already good at in helping their team perform under different conditions. And you can build on those strengths, making sure that the leader can reinforce development of greater cultural awareness. One example might be active listening. If active listening is already a skill that a leader has, they can then take that active listening and deliberately use it to explore that cultural intelligence. Like, you know, a colleague in another country struggling to be effective during lockdown, use active listening to understand what's going on for that person, what cultural issues there might be. And the third one is to help leaders understand for themselves what's going to feel different for them and for their team when they start developing that cultural intelligence. If a leader doesn't experience any difference, and if they don't hear or see from their team that anything feels different, then there will be less incentive to keep trying and less sense of progress and satisfaction. So I personally don't think that travel is required, although I think it definitely helps. And I think that there is anyone who has not experienced cultural differences. All leaders have encountered cultural difference, but perhaps they've never become aware that these differences exist. Just like someone who talks to their mother on the phone and can recognize tone deaf.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you, David, and thank you to you all. And just before we wrap up, there's a short question for each of you. So one question, and if we could get all of your answers, that would be superb. And it was based off of a suggestion of Emma's, actually, around what skill or quality would you recommend that leaders work on developing to either best cope in the current context or to adapt to the coming new normal. And so if we can start back with you, Tony, and then we'll work.
Okay. I mentioned before about the importance of listening, and that's something that's come through. But I think this period, for many of us, has been an opportunity for some really good self-reflection and to really think about what we want from life, but also, you know, to look at how we've behaved at work and, you know, with our friends and with our partners and so on. And I just think that people, the skill that they can develop is to really understand what they are, what they're like, you know, what their good points are, what are the points that they need to develop. I mean, I'll take the example of, you know, being into the concept of compassion. I mean, there's a lot of people who are trying to actually help everybody at the moment because their instinct, for example, my wife, she's like this. She's kind, caring person. So her instinct is to always help somebody, and she could get absolutely submerged by requests, but also by her actions, and she may not be able to prioritize it. So it's important that somebody like my wife actually can, you know, practices self-compassion, looks after herself. She's actually sunbathing in the garden at the moment, so she's doing it appropriately. But you know, and then there's somebody like myself who actually operates on the concept of guilt. You know, so the reason I try to do things which are kind is because I feel guilty if I don't do them. It's probably down to my Catholic upbringing and my mother, but you know, that's the way I am. So I need to be aware that I need to regularly have exposure to things that will affect me. So, you know, you turn on the television now, you see these stories of absolutely selfless bravery and kindness that people are doing, not just in the workplace, but in society as a whole. And, you know, that makes me realize that those are the right things to do. And to be able to have access to that media, that culture, which keeps me as much as possible on the straight and narrow, is something that I need to do. So I think the answer then is, the skill is to actually be true to yourself, to really be true to yourself on an ongoing basis, understand the things that you can do really well, understand those things where you need developments, and to share those with your teams, and to actually make this a real team approach.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tony. And then Julie, what would you choose?
I think looking after yourself is really important. You know, it's like the oxygen mask, you know, analogy. You wouldn't, you know, you need to put your mask on first before you go and help somebody else. And I think it's really, really important as leaders that you do look after yourself. I think it's also making sure that you don't put yourself under too much pressure. A lot of us are trying to be superheroes at the moment. We're not. We are not superheroes. We are normal human beings. And picking up on what Tony said, you know, there are a lot of us out there that are taking on more responsibility for people's well-being than actually you should be doing. You know, there are experts out there that this is their area. So, you know, as an everyday leader in an organisation, you know, you need to recognise that you will not always have all the answers, that it is okay to turn around and say, do you know, I'm not quite sure. A good example I heard the other day was somebody had a phone call from a member of staff who was in crisis, and in that company they got mental health first aiders, and what that leader did was message the mental health first aider why she'd got the member of staff on the call, and was asking, how do I support this person because they're in crisis. That's, to me, is a good leader, because they recognise that they need support. So I think it's got to look after yourself first. You know, that's what I'm doing. And the other thing is, like I say, you can't all be superheroes. And when all else fails, I'm finding that plenty of chocolate and watching funny things on the television is getting me through things. So it's about, you know, being real. And I'm telling my colleagues that, you know, please be aware, I will be 2 sizes bigger when you see me, if I actually can get out the house at the end of lockdown. Be yourself and be able to have a laugh as well, because, you know, laughter is the one thing that I think will get us through this, especially when there's some really sad things that we're going to have to endure over the coming months.
Absolutely. Super. Thank you, Julie. And what would your answer to the question be, Emma?
Well, I would definitely echo what people are saying around self-care and self-reflection. I mean, for me, in terms of what skills I think, because it's such an unprecedented situation, there's so many unknowns, there's so much uncertainty. The way I've been leading my team remotely has just been around some guiding principles. So one about well-being, so one is about my own first and foremost, but then my team's. The next point is just around offering people clarity as much as possible, and that means around priorities, but also processes and systems like consolidation, simplification. That's definitely what I've been trying to implement for my team. The next point for me has always been about community, and I really take what Asif was saying, that we're losing the kind of social stuff that would just happen organically in the workplace, and we might have to do a bit of moniker from friends, like some organised fun, to bring it back in when we're working in a remote way. But definitely two-way dialogue, community, and building that togetherness, it's such a protective factor. And you've seen it on Twitter, you've seen all the we're in it together. And then the final point is about reflective. So I feel like I'm mirroring what Tony and Julie have said. You know, we all had to spring into action and mobilize, but now it's about pause, it's about what's working, what isn't, both for myself, my team, and so on. So those are the things that I've been thinking through as the guiding principles to inform how I lead my team and also how I work with employers more broadly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emma. And Asif, what would your advice be on this point?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'd agree with everyone's comments so far. The only thing I'd add is I think there is this real element of being human, or leaders need to be human, both now and after. And what do I mean by that? You know, especially in the D&I space. D&I, I mean, I've always said that D&I isn't that policy, it isn't that program. I mean, those are things around D&I, but that's not the answer right now. And I think people who are human now, leaders who are human, people will remember that. They will see the value in those companies that are being human with their staff. And being human means having those conversations, you know, that really allow people to be authentic and talking about, you know, things that matter to people. The problem is that, you know, it's very easy to go into process. And the truth is, a lot of processes are not equipped for the environment that we're currently living in, from a D&I perspective as well, and will not be fit for the future of work either. But being human is a principle that we can use throughout the process. And leaders who are being empathetic, who are showing their vulnerabilities, who are talking about the challenges they're facing, that is supporting staff more than saying, well, here's a program on how to work flexibly that you can go on for 45 minutes and you'll have the answers at the end of it. So I think that principle is really, really important, and we need to really get leaders to continue that. And also talk about some of the failings. I think leaders need to do that, and where they don't have all the answers. There is, again, a perception that, you know, diversity and inclusion can sometimes be one of those things we'll talk about if it's good. But actually, even if it's bad and you talk about it, it's comforting for people. So, you know, right now, again, there's that opportunity to have that conversation, to talk about it, to talk about learnings, to ask, we're not sure how the offices are going to, you know, look, or how can we best support people who are working from home. And people will appreciate that more than not having the conversation.
Super. Thank you, Asif. And then finally on to you, David. What advice would you offer in this instance?
Thanks, Grace, and thanks, Emma, for the profound question. Well, I think I'm going to focus on the simplest thing I can think of here. I would develop a profound connection to love and belonging. Why? Because for me, at least, it's the strongest, most powerful force for good that we experience in our lives. You know, love and belonging bypass all of the rational, brain-based approaches that have arguably been the cause of much misery in the workplace. I'm not sure that we can analyze our way to a solution for the situation that we're in. As people have mentioned, this is unprecedented, it's complex. We don't quite know what's going to happen. And the idea that we can just sit down in a room with a spreadsheet and kind of come up with an analysis that gives us a solution doesn't work here. For a leader to follow their heart and cultivate love is an act of courage, vulnerability, and great power. And I think it's the most powerful antidote to uncertainty and fear that there is. And we live in a time of great upheaval and uncertainty, and a lot of fear. So this seems to me to be the single most important thing to focus on, and the best way to cope and to adapt. Whether this connection to love and belonging in the workplace is a skill or a quality, or maybe something else altogether, like a way of being, is a discussion for another day, I think. And I don't say or think that it's an easy thing to develop, but I do feel that it's powerful and transformative.
Wonderful. Well, that is a lovely note to end on, and also it brings together a lot of what all of you have been saying so far. And thanks so much for your time and insights and advice. It was really valuable and so interesting and enjoyable to interact with all of you and to hear what you had to say. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.